Well, hello and welcome. I'm Raj Kumar, President and Editor-in-Chief of DevX, and honored to be back again this year, helping to host and facilitate this session on digital ID for development. It's great to be with all of you, even in this virtual format. I just welcome you from wherever you are in the world joining us. It's not the same, not to be in person at the World Bank's headquarters, but this has been an important set of annual meetings. And I think you'll find this session in particularly is relevant to the moment that we're all in today. You know, we've seen due to the pandemic that digital transformation has totally accelerated. It's changed a lot of our lives. I mean, we're ordering groceries maybe in a way we didn't before. We're perhaps getting access to healthcare services online in a way we didn't. We're banking digitally. So much has transformed for so many people. And yet, you know, we know the pandemic has just laid bare the inequalities that exist in the world. And there's still a billion people that are largely left out of that kind of a digital transformation, in part because they don't have an identification. They're not connected in the way that the rest of us are. And this session really aims to not only highlight that issue, I know we're joined by people all over the world who know this issue well, but also to talk about how do we use the moment we're in now to make real progress. And so the World Bank and the ID4D team has put together a really incredible lineup of global leaders, ministers, outspoken leaders on these issues. And I think we're going to dive deep and hopefully really learn something together today as a group. So I thank you for being a part of it. The session is going to begin with some high-level remarks from World Bank Managing Director Mari Pangetsu, as well as Her Majesty Queen Máxima of the Netherlands. We'll then move into a panel format, and we'll end with this Mission Billion Challenge, where we're going to get to hear about some really exciting innovations from these challenge winners. Same thing we did last year, and I can tell you it's worth waiting around for. It's a lot of fun. So I appreciate all of you being a part of this today, and I want to now welcome to kick us off Dr. Mari Pangetsu, who is the World Bank Managing Director for Development Policy and Partnerships, and also chairs the ID4D High-Level Advisory Council. Over to you, Mari.
Thank you, Raj, and good morning, good day to all of you. Your Majesty Queen Máxima of the Netherlands, the UN Secretary General Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, Excellencies, President Kersti Kaljulaid, Minister Sri Mulyani Indrawati, Minister Sheena Lawson, Minister Isa Ali Pantami, Minister David Senge, Chairman Nandan Nikolani, and other distinguished guests, including judges and finalists of the 2020 Mission Billion Global and West African Innovation Challenges. I'm really excited to be with all of you today around this virtual roundtable or virtual event on inclusive digital ID for a resilient recovery from COVID-19. And as Raj said, we really want to be talking how we can take the moment of what's happening today to make some significant changes for digital transformation. I speak today with two hats as the World Bank's Managing Director for Development Policy Partnership, and as Raj mentioned, as Chair of the High-Level Advisory Council of our Identification for Development and Government to Persons Payment Initiative. With Dr. Sri Mulyani and Nandan are also members of this High-Level Advisory Council. So I'm really honored to be joined by such an illustrious group of speakers and delighted to see so many of you being connected virtually. And, you know, just to reflect on the importance of our mission, the whole ID4D is about digital ID. And all of us today take our ID for granted. All of us have legal ID and most likely also a digital ID. And it has been the gateway for us to participate in the economy, participate in all things that are about living and about accessing to essential services. Unfortunately, our estimate from ID4D estimates that there are 1 billion people who have absolutely no officially recognized ID, let alone a digital ID, with half of them in Africa, and nearly half of those who don't have ID are children who have not even had their birth registered. So many, and furthermore, many people may have an ID, but it might not be fit for purpose in the digital age. So as we will hear from panelists today, the digital ID systems that are secure, reliable, and interoperable will help governments and businesses expand access to their services, by reducing both the cost and the time needed for the service delivery. But as we all know, this is not just about efficiency, but about the digital dividends that will be delivered through inclusiveness and development. I think the times of today, the way we are seeing how the COVID-19 pandemic has evolved and has actually emphasized the need for such a digital ID system. That because governments that have the ability to respond fast and at scale to provide relief, to save livelihoods and protect people, have been able to do so because they've had digital ID systems. And we all know that the trusted digital ID system is only one of the core building blocks of what's called the stack, that together with digital payments and data interoperability and shared services can be transformational for not just delivering the social assistance that we are seeing happening, but also to build an inclusive and resilient digital economy and societies. There are many examples of this use case, and the social assistance and delivering it through mobile payments is one aspect that we have seen being rolled out in many countries. But even before the pandemic, I think delivery of financial services, access to markets, and so on have been also demonstrated. Countries that have such systems, as I said, have been able to move at speed and scale and made a difference in responding to the pandemic by helping deliver cash transfers and ensuring continuity of services and markets. In India, for example, they were able to deliver new emergency payments to more than 200 million women in financial inclusion programs as a result of linking their bank accounts to their digital ID. Indonesia also has had similar experiences. In Estonia, 99% of government services were already fully accessible online, so these face minimal disruptions. And countries that don't have the system are actually working with us on many fronts to try to build up systems using the opportunity of the crisis to build existing systems, improve existing systems, or where there's no system, to start a system. And one of the most exciting opportunities of this digital stack is obviously addressing the gender divide. 1 in 3 women in low-income countries does not have an ID, and this barrier has confounding effects with access to SIM registration and financial inclusion. Equipped with digital IDs, women and girls can be empowered to access more and better services, including having their own accounts, receiving government support, and owning property in their own name. So in terms of the digital divide, it's essential that any technological solutions are designed to be inclusive, and especially those who have limited digital access and tools, which is exactly why the problem that this year's Billion Challenge is seeking to identify these solutions. We at the World Bank, as I mentioned, we've been working hard with many countries for the ID4D program. And we are working together with many partners. Some are here today, and we have been able to come up with a global alignment on the framework for a good digital ID system, and also with practical tools for its implementation, and providing technical support to 35 countries to put good ID into practice, including, as I just mentioned, as we roll out the COVID response. For example, in the Philippines, we are advising the government as they have used their existing system to deliver social protection. They are now going to be rolling out the first digital ID system to be able to better deliver the social protection. And I really want to acknowledge that this reach and scale of impact would not be possible without support of our partners, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the UK government, the French government, and the Omidyar network. And we have, as you know, recently launched the government to person, or G2P payment program through digitization with cross-sectoral approach to accelerate financial inclusion, women's economic empowerment, and government fiscal savings. So we really look forward to continuing to scale up our thought leadership, our convening power, our advice and financing to help countries have a resilient recovery and emerge from this crisis stronger and more inclusive than before, and use the opportunity to accelerate digital transformation at the same time. It is now my honor to invite Her Majesty Queen Máxima, in her capacity as the UN Secretary General Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, to share her thoughts about digital ID and digital infrastructure more broadly and how it can empower women and girls. The floor is yours, Queen Máxima.
Ms. Pangestu, thank you very much for having me here. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to join you virtually in this very important conference. I've been a partner for ID4D for many years now, and I've seen the very big progress that the committee is doing. So I would like to first of all acknowledge that. And this is very timely. The COVID-19 pandemic has actually caused the deepest global recession that we've had in 8 decades. 150 million people around the world could potentially be pushed back into extreme poverty by the end of 2021. And this has been especially challenging for the most poor and marginalized people across the globe. Certainly, people that just previously didn't have limited or no access to financial services and resources prior to this pandemic. It has been said before, women definitely have been disproportionately affected. Women are twice as likely as men to lose their jobs. So it's something to look into, but also not only women, but also the whole informal sector have actually suffered significantly. They are covered, they're not really covered for social insurance, and of course are not registered to relevant government assistance programs. So this underscores some of the challenges to ensuring that underserved segments have access to tools for resilience. This pandemic has also demonstrated the importance of digital public goods. Our digital ID and interoperable payments have played a key role to help countries weather the crisis and explore new opportunities. Over 200 nations have expanded social protection measures, many using foundation ID systems and digital payments to provide transfers directly into bank accounts or mobile wallets. For example, Chile used its national ID system to help rapidly pre-enroll millions of new beneficiaries for emergency support. They could even further request support online. These type of programs can create a very important entry point to the formal financial system by, of course, establishing new account holders and giving them access to digital financial services that support recovery efforts. Consequently, the crisis has created momentum in many countries to implement new ID systems or have boosted the coverage and strengthened the capabilities of the existing ones. Now, sequencing and coordination are particularly important as the urgency of the pandemic might result in decisions not always being aligned across the government or with global best practices. As countries look to make progress, they can start by recognizing that a whole of government approach helps ensure that all involved ministries and agencies share the same vision and commitment. Seeking technical assistance for system design from parties like ID4D, as well as learning from the experiences of other countries such as Peru, Estonia, and India at a very early stage would be key. To assist in planning, there are established international standards and best practices that can be built upon. These can help ensure that ID systems are implemented responsibly, with inclusion, privacy, and people needs front and center. It is important to think about ID systems outside silos. ID systems can achieve the greatest impact when they are interoperable and closely linked with other digital public goods. Some of these are critical for access, such as connectivity and agent networks. Others make markets work better for customers, including fair competition and interoperable payment systems. And some protect the financial system and its users, such as data privacy, cybersecurity, and consumer protection, not to ever forget the digital and financial literacy. ID systems, which are part of a stack of digital public goods, have helped individuals and businesses take advantage of the digital economy. This includes a vast array of use cases from eKYC, online payments and other financial services, access to markets, delivery of goods and services, to contracting, telemedicine, and online education. By building in modern data sharing and consent frameworks into streamlined enrollments, authentication and authorization processes, countries do have the opportunity to reimagine the digital future of their economies and their people. Now is a great time to invest in the digital infrastructure and to pass reforms that allow countries and people to capitalize on digital technology that ensure the underserved are not left behind. This matters most for countries in Africa and Asia, with the majority of the 1 billion people without proof of official identity reside. And it is crucial to empower women and the poor in the digital economy, particularly as half of the low-income women do not possess an ID. My partners and I stand ready to provide technical support and share international best practices. This includes the G7 Partnership for Women and Digital Financial Inclusion in Africa, which places an explicit focus on identification as a key enabler. Finally, I would like to stress how important ID is at this time to help countries respond to and recover from the impacts of COVID-19. I wish you all much success in your efforts. It is really important that we show leadership by example and by also communication and dialogue with other people so we can help them out. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Queen Máxima and Mari Pangetsu. I know that everyone at home is joining me in some warm applause for those great introductory remarks. Again, if we were in person, you would hear that, but I assure you that's the sentiment. They were excellent remarks that I think kicked us off in the right direction, in part because it's so easy for people to think of ID as a narrow technical issue. That we just need to bring in the technical experts and we figure out how to get someone an ID. And I think what Her Majesty and what Mari put out very clearly to all of us is the idea that digital ID is more of a underlying framework and infrastructure that touches everything and ultimately directly addresses development challenges, including the most underserved, the most marginalized populations in the world. It's not a coincidence that the people who don't have the ID are often the most marginalized people in a society. So I think there's a great framework you both laid out for us to take the conversation forward. We have an excellent panel. Let me just mention who's coming up in this panel. You'll be hearing from Dr. Sri Mulyani Indrawati, who's the Minister of Finance in Indonesia, a member of the High-Level Advisory Committee for ID4D, and of course, a former Managing Director at the World Bank. Sina Lawson, the Minister of Post, Digital Economy and Technology Innovation in the Republic of Togo. Nandan Nilekani, who is the founding chair of the Unique ID Authority of India, Aadhaar, very well known, of course, in this space, and is also a member of the ID4D High-Level Advisory Committee. Isa Ali Pantami, the Minister for Communications in Nigeria, David Moina Senge, who's the Minister of Basic and Secondary Education and the Chief Innovation Officer in the Republic of Sierra Leone. And we're going to begin now with the President of the Republic of Estonia, President Kaljulaid, and I would like to welcome her to the discussion. And maybe, you heard this in the introductory remarks, President Kaljulaid, but Estonia is well known as a leader, maybe the godmother in a way of this whole movement toward digital ID. And maybe countries that are following this, that are joining the session today, are wondering what sort of lessons you've learned and taken away from that pioneering path that you've taken that might help inform others who want to make digital ID part of their future. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And indeed, it's very encouraging how many countries now ask us, how did you do it? And the answer, I believe, is something which many people do not expect. Digital ID is not about technology. It's about legal space, which has to be permissive and at the same time protective. And then it's about our society. These are the two important elements. First of all, the only entities who can create digital IDs are states. It's sometimes funny how governments blame big internet companies for anonymity in internet or for the lack of clear identity. The only entity who can guarantee legally an ID is the same one who can give out a paper passport, and this means a government. So digital ID has to be linked to your national passport system. In fact, it is a passport. In analog world, you wouldn't trust anybody who just says they are who they are by nickname. You only trust those who show their passports. Digital ID is exactly the same, and it's protected by the law from falsification and from misuse. Otherwise, it cannot function. If you accept that it is a passport, then this means, of course, that automatically all service providers, both public and private service providers, can use it. It has to be open for both public and private service providers. Similarly, as in an analog world, you use the same passport to access services everywhere. So by definition, it will be interoperable because there's only one, like in analog world. Estonia Digital ID works to access your bank account, and it works to access your social services account and your e-health account, and of course the tax board. The next step is to make sure that both the private and public sector understand that this is the only ID in internet which has this legal guarantee, and that there cannot be alternatives. So you have to force your government institutions, of course, first and foremost, to use the single digital ID. And then you also can convince the private sector to be on board, because after all, private sector doesn't want to face the cost which comes with running digital IDs, you know, bank tokens and all these. If you can bring both sides together, you have an universal interoperable system without having to do much more about making service after service interoperable. They are linked on a single backbone of a digital ID. It looks like a sun. There is a nucleus, which is the ID, and there can be thousands or tens of thousands of services surrounding this nucleus. And each people can approach each and every service through this middle nucleus, which is the digital ID ecosystem. And now the number of services you can connect as government is basically, the sky is the limit, and the same for the private sector. See, you are creating in internet what you have on street space. I mean, nothing more and nothing less. Now, there are some additional tricks which you can do to make your people really use it. First of all, we in Estonia stuck our first digital ID on our analog identity card, the same one which we use for travel and identification, let's say, if you go to the doctors or elsewhere in the real life. So people all will have it. It's by definition inclusive. If you have an ID, you also have a digital ID. And then, of course, we made sure that people who have once given government some information about themselves don't need to repeat it to another system. So if I once said to government something, the government needs to know it. It's called once only principle. This means people revert quickly to the digital services because it's just so far easier, less hassle. Then, next thing is, start your service provision with something which people really want to. Our carrot service, or the first service which we created, was actually an electronic tax board. You know why? Because, I mean, it feels like adding insult to injury if you have to go and queue to pay your taxes to your government. So we knew that nobody wants to see the taxman. You don't have to see the taxman. There is internet tax board, and you can pay your taxes. Another good carrot service is social services. People don't really want to go to the social service office. Your neighbor may see it, so they can do it online. And then finally, you can grow your service base so you reach the final service, which should be really the last one because it's a high trust service, and this is electronic elections. This way, gradually, you build a digital ecosystem, which in Estonia now serves already for 20 years our people. So we have a generation who doesn't know where is a tax office, where is the social office, where is the city government. It's all online. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, President Kallid, that is a vision of a society that's quite far ahead of many of the countries that we're talking about, but perhaps does offer some good lessons and inspiration for others who are thinking about how they can get there. Maybe it's a good moment. We'll come back around to all our panelists, but maybe it's a good moment to bring in Minister Sri Mulyani from Indonesia. Indonesia is an advancing economy. You've got a very vibrant digital economy, and I think 90% of the country has a formal identification. we've been hearing now a little theme coming through so far about this idea of whole of government. And I wonder how you think about that from your position as Minister of Finance in Indonesia. How do you think about the ID as connected to a whole of government approach to provide such an array of services as President Khalid has just laid out?
What has been said by President Christine is also applied to many other, or maybe in this case, the size of the country and the population is different. Indonesia is a big country, maybe not as big as India, but still very big, 267 million. And we are now have already captured biometric digital ID data. That include fingerprint, retinal, and facial scan for our electronic ID. That is almost 99% of national ID owners. And that is what we try to build, not always easy from the very beginning. The choice of the technology, how you are going to build, who's going to manage it, that is also an issue. And that goes to more than 75,000, what we call it, villages in this case. So for us, the necessary condition is there. So before that, you can imagine that, as mentioned by President Christine earlier, that for the tax idea, we have a totally different ID system, not interoperable with this people ID. And then we also have for the custom, it's a different for people who receive the social protection or social assistance, it's going to be different. With this non-necessary one biometric digital ID, then we are going to be able to now try to synchronize and even forcing a system to use one single ID. That is the most important part. For example, like on a tax system now, we sometimes asking people not their tax ID, but their personal ID. That is going to be then can be recalibrated so that they are going to be consistent. This process is now ongoing. And with that, then we are going to be simplifying the system. As also for me as a Minister of Finance, it's going to be very good because then I know that I don't have to allocate budget in a partial way in all ministries, in all local government for first buying the hard infrastructure, second developing the system, and then they are not consistent and not operating that can be synchronized. And that's going to be very not only inefficient, but also can create a lot of waste and sometimes a loophole. I sometimes make a joke for Indonesia, you don't really have to do the tax evasion by evading tax going out from Indonesia, but you can just go from one provincial to another provincial area in Indonesia because we are such a big country. Because we are not yet have this infrastructure as well as the ID system that can tracking people in the most efficient way. So for a country, even as the bigger than your country in terms of the population, geography, the necessary condition to have this ID system, which is consistent and become the foundation for all the government program and policy is going to be the better. It may need a big investment initially, but that's worth to do because then you are going to then avoiding many repetitive, sometimes also inefficient investment for the system as well as the system which is not compatible to each other. What is the benefit for us now? We are allowed, for example, now to have the targeting. Certainly for Indonesia, when we are going to target the 20% bottom of the population to receive the social protection, then you are going to be able to identify them by name, by address, by even account number. We are going to be able to provide the services for health, especially for primary health care, which is currently also still very separated from this database system. The primary health care from 9,900 primary health care in Indonesia, they are stored individually in each of these primary health care. It's not becoming consolidated. And that's why when we are now have the universal health system, health coverage system, which creating a huge headache for me, because then at the same time we provide subsidy or support for the poor family, but then there is really poor people which is not yet targeted because you have two different systems. On those, the personal ID and the one which is related to the health ID. So this is also another that just to show that if you have so many different system and ID system, then you are not going to get the best or the maximum benefit of this kind of system. So that is the most important part. For us also, it can also creating a much better efficiency gain across government, of course. As you can see that the targeting as well as the cost, both on a hardware as well as the software. So I will stop here. If you want to continue, want me to continue, I will also continue.
Yeah, no, let's move on to our next panel. So we'll come back around. I think you've laid out well some of the arguments for why this makes so much sense in a country like Indonesia, where you're getting immediate efficiency gains by the government being able to know who you're targeting. But there's also the value added, the things you can do now that you couldn't do before when you didn't have a unified system. And I think maybe we can bring in the case of Togo as a good example. We have seen a loss in the Minister of Post, Digital Economy and Technological Innovation because as the pandemic hit, you stood up a new cash transfer program. I think the name of it is Novisi, and you're serving 580,000 beneficiaries. 65% of them are women. So maybe this is a good example of what having a digital ID system can unlock in terms of potential to provide value-added service to your citizens, especially during a crisis. Minister Lawson, would you like to pick up from there and tell us a bit more about that program and how it works?
Yes, thank you very much for having me here. The Novisi, the Novisi program is a program that we launched early April to support the poorest and those who were going to be affected by restrictive measures that we took against COVID-19. So it's an all digital cash transfer program destined to assist the informal sector. So we created a platform, a USSD platform, and we used people's biometric ID, voters' ID, to determine who was to enable them to register on the platform. And based on their professions and locations, we were able to very quickly, instantly, actually give them payouts. The beauty of the Novisi program was that within the initial 2 months, 1.4 million people registered to the program, which is approximately 38% of the entire Togolese adult population, and out of which 580,000 people received funds. So in terms of funds, what we did is that we gave approximately 1/3 of the minimum wage, and so women would receive more than men. We gave approximately $20 to women and $18 to men. It was very important for us to offer higher payouts to women than men because these funds were destined to support families. So we wanted really to do something different in terms of how we view support of families. So so the Novisi program is really an all-in-one solution that brings together not only USSD but mobile money, SMS technologies to empower the government to design and implement G2P social transfer campaigns. We were helped by this because we just had presidential elections a few months before. So the entire adult population had up-to-date biometric IDs through their voters' ID. So in terms of what we've also learned is that we needed to build trust in the system. So when we designed the platform, once everybody would register, once someone would register, he would instantly receive payouts. So the final point that I have to make is that because because we use voters ID, we were able to target the adult population. What we've learned through the process is that it was very important for us to move very quickly towards having foundational IDs so that we could design other programs that could possibly target people who were lower than 18, younger than 18, etc.
I think you've laid out well this issue that the foundational ID, another kind of term of art, I think people in the ID community use, maybe not everyone joining knows what that means, but the basic concept, if you have that foundational ID, you can build many services on top of it. And perhaps some who are joining this who are newer to the issue might think, well, that's a nice thing to have. It's not an essential thing, but I think your case in Togo shows how this kind of foundational ID can directly connect to poverty alleviation programs and reaching the most vulnerable. So maybe just to pick up on that point, we can go to Nandan Nilekani, who I think is a name all of you well know for your leadership on Aadhaar, the founding chair of what I imagine is the world's largest digital ID system. I think the number is something like 1.2 billion Indians who are registered through it. And Nandan, you've been for many, many years talking about this idea of a stack. So not thinking of the ID in this narrow technical sense, but thinking of it as an important layer in a stack of services you can build. So maybe I'm just curious to know what you'd like to add to the discussion based on what you've heard so far and based on the lessons now of 10 years of Aadhaar in India.
Yeah, so I think you're raising a very important point, Rajkumar, which is that how do you build infrastructure and architecture in the long term for national public purposes? And we began with the ID system called Aadhaar when I joined the government in 2009, and now there are 1.25 billion people on it. And it's very extensively used. It does more than 1 billion authentications a month using iris, fingerprint, OTP, or face authentication. It's linked to the banking system. So it's the world's largest cash transfer system also works on it, which was very handy in the pandemic because 150 to 200 million people got money directly into their bank accounts in real time, thanks to this infrastructure. So I think the way we thought about it is that in government, you can't, if you try to do something very complex and sophisticated from day one, it often sinks under its own weight. So we thought of it as layers. So the first layer was identity. Then using the same identity, we developed the KYC, so you could open a bank account or get a mobile connection. Then we linked it to the banking system and allowed people to withdraw money from the bank account using the ID system that's called the Aadhaar-enabled payment system. Then we developed a digital signature on top of it so that you could sign a document digitally online with your ID. And then we developed a new payment system called UPI, which is a state-of-the-art mobile-to-mobile payment system that the last month did 1.8 billion transactions. And now the piece being built is called account aggregators, which is a way to empower people with their own data. So if you're a person if you're a small business that is paying taxes and processing invoices, then you can use that data to get a loan and so on. So I think over the last 10, 11 years, layers and layers of this technology has been created. They're all interoperable. They're all designed to operate at billion scale. And I think they play a big role in this whole thing. So I think having a strategic architecture of what you want to achieve, I think is very important. We had the advantage that the ID was a foundational ID. It was not a functional ID. It was not parked in any ministry, because when you park the ID in a ministry, then that ministry's demands overcome the need to make it a foundational ID. So it was a neutral location in the government. And we worked with all ministries equally to make sure that it worked for everyone. So I think some of it was serendipity, but I think some of it was having a strategic, holistic view of what should be the long-term infrastructure for 1 billion people in a digital platform.
And I guess those countries which haven't yet built this foundational ID can be thinking in those terms, right? To be thinking about what are some of the services we want this to enable and design it for that purpose.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the, I think as many people have mentioned, that you need some compelling use case In our case, the compelling use case was the bank account, in which government benefits would flow in. And once people realize that you get the ID, you can open a bank account with it, you get money into that in a paperless, real-time way, it all made sense to everyone.
Let me bring Dr. Isa Ali Pantami, the Minister for Digital Communications in Nigeria, into the discussion. Minister, maybe you can help to tackle a question that perhaps people are thinking, listening to Nanda Nilekani, which is that if the digital ID is going to become so pervasive in its use, so many great applications and use cases, how do we ensure that there's trust in the privacy of your data? How do we address those data privacy and trust issues? Nigeria, of course, has a vibrant digital payments and money, digital money system. People pay all the time with mobile phones. There was just a big acquisition of a major company, Paystack, I think last week in Nigeria by Stripe, a big digital payments company. How do you think about this in your role as Minister of Digital Communications, ensuring that there's trust and privacy embedded into a system of digital ID?
So thank you very much for asking this very important question. Firstly, let me begin by saying that only on the 7th October 2020, this month, the President of Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari, has transferred the supervision of digital ID to my ministry. So I happen to be the one supervising the implementation of digital ID in the country. And secondly, we discovered that digital ID is key to our social intervention, is key to economic development, is key to security and many more. It is because of this that the supervision has been transferred to me. And secondly, we have been working on how to transform the National Identity Management Commission, which has been established by law of NIMC 2007, to ensure that each citizen and any legal resident in the country has been provided with the digital ID. So in Nigeria, knowing our population and how we are so much attached to digitalization and digital facilities, we have so many laws and policies in place that will bring about confidentiality, data privacy, and many more. Firstly, when it comes to law, we have Cybercrime Act 2007, which is an act of parliament that try to protect the confidentiality of our citizens. And most importantly, in the constitution of our country, that is Constitution of Nigeria 1999 as amended, under section 37, it is clearly stated that there must be data privacy and confidentiality is part of the fundamental human rights in our country, particularly if one is innocent and there is no any serious allegation against him, then all his conversation, transaction, online phone calls and everything must be confidential, and government must ensure that that confidentiality and privacy is there. So it's part of our constitution. And thirdly, only last year, on 28 November 2019, we launched and unveiled our national digital economy policy for a digital Nigeria, starting from 2020 to 2030. In that document, it is clearly stated under pillar number 8, that is soft infrastructure, that cybersecurity is key to the success of our digital economy, in which digital ID is a component of that digital economy. In addition, before my elevation to the position of a minister, I was at the National Information Technology Development Agency, which is the regulatory body of infotech in the country. I was there as the chief executive. There, on 25th November 2019, we launched a subsidiary legislation that is called Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, which is just like our own replica of the European Data Protection Regulation. So we have our Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, in which almost everything has been captured in that document when it comes to data privacy, confidentiality, and many more. So we have laws in place and so many policies in place to ensure that the privacy of data and the confidentiality of the record of our citizens is well protected. Even when it comes to digital ID, if you look at the National Identity Management Commission Act 2007, under section 26, it is clearly stated that even the record of the digital ID is confidential. even the record itself, it is confidential. So no one will just have access to it anyway, except when there is genuine reason for that and there is an approval from the owner of that data before it is released. So because of this, we have so many laws and policies in place in Nigeria that will definitely help us to achieve that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm sure this is a theme we might come back to in the remaining minutes of the panel. Yeah, there are technical questions about how do you make sure that the system can't be hacked or misused in some way, but then there's also just the trust of the public and them understanding, what is it that their country is investing into. I want to bring into the conversation Ms. Michaela McKay, who's the Chief Operating Officer and Director of the Directorate of Science, Technology, and Innovation in Sierra Leone. And you're here representing your minister. Michaela, I wonder, my understanding is that in Sierra Leone, you have an approach to digital ID, which is to use it as a way into a broader, comprehensive service delivery of government service to your citizens. So it's more a transformation plan than just the digital ID plan. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about how you see that and how it's going.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. I think the most important thing to mention is Sierra Leone's affirmation that digital identification is the right of the citizens and probably the only viable means through which you could have citizen participation in economic growth, and that's assured and actually could be secured. And another really has been the realization and the acceptance that the conventional paper-based forms of identification, which of course we all know it's impossible to verify or to validate, cannot be used to determine mechanisms by which state resources could be channeled or through which recipients could be identified. So one thing the pandemic has done, as with several other countries, is to create an opportunity for us to leapfrog directly to digital identification instead of taking incremental steps. Unfortunately, as with Estonia, we do not have a singular digital backbone registration system. We have multiple systems, one of which we recently launched, for instance, is we deployed the blockchain digital identification system to enable entrepreneurs and individuals to have access to credit, which is actually channeled by the Bank of Sierra Leone. We're also looking at setting up another system of identification where the farmers, particularly the women in rural districts, could be digitally recognized and registered so they can have access to subsidies to enable them promote and drive their farming objectives. And we're also looking at how we can digitize and identify pregnant women, because one of our policy objectives is to see how we can reduce maternal mortality rates and monitor prenatal and postnatal care of women. So we really do have diverse systems that we are using at the moment to be able to digitally identify our citizens, including also integrated tax identification system. So what we are looking at right now, and again, that is because we're seeing it as mere transformational, but however, it's very important to see how all of these systems could be interoperable and how they can sync and work as one platform or one database to be able to adequately identify your citizens so that they could be, it could be very inclusively, particularly from a financial perspective, and be a part of the ecosystem in total. So we're looking at quite a lot of partnerships, maybe how we can work with Estonia and other countries who have done it before, and we could also learn from them and make our systems better.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I imagine it makes it that much easier to make the public case for a digital ID system when you can focus on the applications and the direct benefits to citizens, as opposed to this sounding like something that's living inside a bureaucracy and doesn't affect your day-to-day life. We don't have that much time left, but I do want to come back around and especially bring in President Khaled. You mentioned something at the beginning about how you may hear your peers or colleagues in other countries talk about the internet companies and what they're doing around anonymity and privacy of data. I wonder, you've been at this for a long time in Estonia. We've heard Nandan Nilekani, India, it's 10 years of Aadhaar. For countries that may be converted, they may be on this call, they might be thinking about why this is important, they believe it's important, but they haven't done it yet, or they're not moving at a fast pace. Is there any risk or danger to not being very proactive as a government and getting a digital ID system in place quickly? Are technology trends moving in such a way that you could actually undermine some of the goals we've outlined here today if you don't bring urgency to an issue like this? How do you see it, President Khalid?
I do see an urgency, but it's not a technological urgency. Actually, if you think, then there might be indeed that there will be quantum computing, and then we need to rethink all our identities because post-quantum IDs will have to differ from what we have today. But there is a different kind of urgency, and that's social. I mean, all our people act and transact online. I mean, quite a big proportion of things we buy, actually contracts we sign, we do over internet. And if there is no digital ID, which has also legal protection, then, I mean, the state cannot police this space of making trade, acting and transacting. So indeed, you have to hurry up because you're otherwise obsolete for your own people. And this is not something which governments really want to be. Also, I guess you don't want to be the last, I mean, office which demands people to print out A4s and arrive at your doorstep. I don't think this also helps with the reputation of the government.
Yeah, good point. Maybe Sri Mulyani, would you like to jump in as well? You had some additional points you wanted to make, so I open the floor to you in general.
I think, especially for developing country, the main constraint is it really a luxury to build this kind of system? Because the budget constraint is certainly a very, very important one. But you actually don't have a choice. I mean, at the end, if you see the transformation of the world, this is going to be the direction that you are going to take. So that's first, how you are going to overcome maybe the initial cost, front loading cost, but it will be a very, very efficient in the future. That is going to be one of the most important political decision and leadership choice, which is very critical for any country to take. The second one is, I think with the technology now, it's getting much cheaper. So it's not really something that you are imagining like in the past, in which it will take a lot of your budget. So the more that you really decide on what technology and what system that you are going to build, I think it's going to be much better and much more efficient use of your budget. The third one is more cultural or behavioral. I mean, for me, with this COVID, you're really forced to transform. You don't have any other choice because you are not going to the office, you're not going to the school. And so you really have to transform into this digital world. And for me, in the Ministry of Finance, we've already prepared like flexible working hour. We've also transformed all the official notes into a digital, and that's really accelerated and abruptly have to be adopted across the unit in the ministry. And that's really went very well. I mean, from the transformation, which we think that it was impossible or very difficult, it's becoming very quick and very efficient. So I think sometimes the barrier is more like the perception, and that's why you really have to prepare it more on, oh, this is not my level, this is not my world, my people is not ready for that. That is not true. So you really have to really convince that the technology and the ID, digital ID, and the system that's supporting it will provide you with the real infrastructure for you to make a progress on your society. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nandan, maybe just turning it to you for a moment, you know, for those countries that are earlier in their adoption and development of a digital ID system, is there anything you would do differently, having had your experience in India, that you would say, here's something you can learn, or maybe because technology has advanced, has gotten cheaper? Is there any new lesson that countries that are earlier in their progress on this should be taking away?
No, I agree with Her Excellency that costs have come down dramatically since we started 11 years back. And I think you can do a real-time ID system for a fraction of the cost. And if you use the ID system as also the basis for disbursement of your benefits, the savings in reducing leakage itself will more than pay for the technology cost. So an ID system pays for itself just from the efficiency that you can get from it. So today I would do it as a real-time system. Now smartphones are much more common. Smartphones come with cameras. So you can build an authentication system using the camera and so on. So I think a lot of the rapid technological improvements have happened, which we can use. But I think the important thing, the lesson that we are learning from all this is also as Her Excellency from Estonia said, digital public goods have to be sponsored by the government. You cannot abdicate digital public goods and let market guys create ID systems, which then they use to peddle ads to you and all that. So fundamentally, governments have to step up to the plate, have to take a leadership role in creating public goods, whether it's an identity platform, payment platform, data empowerment platform, because these are really the role of government to provide. And I think one of the things that has happened in the last 20 years is, governments have not stepped up to this in the belief, either because it's too complicated or the belief that the market should do that. So I think the lesson we are learning, especially in the pandemic, is that some basic digital goods have to be provided by government.
And in just the remaining 1 or 2 minutes we have left, I want to see if any of the other panelists have a final thought they want to share with the group. Perhaps I can turn to you, Minister Pantami. One point that I think we want to make sure comes out of the discussion is how this conversation actually relates to the most vulnerable populations. And we've had a bit of that here, but I might want to just turn it to you for your thoughts on, as you think about designing the digital ID system in Nigeria and taking it forward into social service applications, how do you ensure it actually gets to the people who are normally left behind when it comes to government programs?
Okay, thank you very much for asking this very important question, President of DevEx. Firstly, when I took over the supervision of NIMSI, the first thing I started working is the development of a national policy for on digital ID for internally displaced persons. It is a national policy that will provide digital ID to people in refugee camps and many more. We call them IDPs, internally displaced persons. This is our top priority. So far, based on their population in the country, there are approximately 3 million. So the first policy is will ensure within next few months, we'll be able to provide digital ID to all of them living in IDPs. With this, that ID could be used in providing social intervention, identifying their identity, because people in IDPs usually don't have any formal form of identification. So our plan now and our top priority, we begin by people in internally displaced camps and provide the digital ID. And through that digital ID, government will be able to reach out to them with any form of social intervention, with any form of support. And at the same time, we'll be able to have their own formal identity in our database. So that plan is top on our priority list.
Thank you for that. And we're a little bit past time, but I'd like to see if Minister Lawson and Michaela McKay would like to say something.
Thank you for the opportunity. Basically, I think that I agree with what the Minister of Nigeria and the President of Estonia, as well as Nandan Nilekani, said, that we need to link foundational ID with use cases and social services. So in Togo, for instance, our plan is to deploy biometric ID and then right after to create a unique social registry for our population. Today, within the administration, too many entities have databases for social services that do not communicate with one another. So our objective is to really tell our citizens that they will have a biometric ID and for a reason. And we want to link this to social services. The other thing that I think is very important, and we did touch it a little bit earlier, is that most people we're targeting don't have phones. So it would be a great thing to actually use the opportunity to deploy biometric ID to give these people phone terminals, and so that we could create mobile banking accounts. So so that's pretty much the way that we're looking at deploying this foundational ID in Togo.
Yeah, the phone is already, obviously the digital divide, whether you have access to a phone and access to internet, is such a stark one that's become more stark with the pandemic. And it may become even further as governments move to more digital provision of service. So it's a good point that this is a population we have to pay particular attention to. Michaela, you raised similar points as well, that you're thinking about this in terms of unifying the ID systems. Maybe you can add your final thoughts as we close out the panel.
Yes, I think that it goes without saying that digital transformation is about the people and not so much the technology. So when you look at a country like Sierra Leone, where we have 30% internet penetration, and you're talking about a digital framework for digital infrastructure, there are people, many stay in areas that are unserved and underserved insofar as the internet is concerned. So our primary focus is to see what kind of low-end technology could we use for people in that location, that will be able to capture vital data and vital information and get them registered so that they'll be all inclusive and people will not be left out because of the locations that they are staying.
Well, I hope everyone who is watching, and I know this is a group of people watching from around the world who probably are already tuned into the issue around digital ID, but I hope they've taken away from this rich discussion something about where it's headed and how our thinking has evolved on it, right? That it isn't just a narrow siloed issue. It really is a whole of government issue that touches the relationship between government and citizen. It connects the private sector and the digital economy. I think there's a lot of great insights and lessons that came from this panel. So I hope all of you at home will join me in thanking these great panelists for their time. It's really an illustrious group. We really appreciate you taking time to focus on this during the World Bank and IMF annual meetings. Thank you for being here. So as the panel closes, we're going to move to the last section of today's event, which is an exciting one. This is the Mission Billion Challenge. If you were with us last year this time, you may recall it. This is something that ID4D at the bank and its partners have set up with the idea that they want to spur innovation and solutions to some of the ID challenges that exist today. And in order to do that, they put together a prize and an independent prize jury, and they award cash prizes that total $150,000 for the most promising solutions. Inclusion is a particularly important issue for them this year, obviously with the pandemic in particular, and delivering cash to vulnerable people, for example, and especially to informal workers. So that has helped to inform their approach. There are two prizes you're going to hear about just now. One is a global prize that's looking at kind of a worldwide application around inclusive ID for vulnerable groups. And then there is a West Africa regional prize that's looking at contributions to social insurance programs, pension savings accounts, and particularly focusing on informal workers. So to tell you more about the prize, to kick us off in this exciting segment, I would like to welcome Mokhtar Diop, who's of course the World Bank Vice President for Infrastructure, to get us started. Mokhtar.
Thank you very much for giving us opportunity for really helping them kick off this very, very interesting panel and conversation. You've been partnering with us for a while, and we really appreciate it. So I will ask Vijayanti, who is coordinating this program in my team, to make the announcement of the winners. Vijayanti, please go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. I just want to mention that we are thrilled to have had such an esteemed panel. Very proud of the finalists. We had over 150 submissions from over 60 countries worldwide who participated in the ID4D Global Prize. This year's challenge, the theme was around inclusion. We know how critical inclusion is to the overall agenda. Let me hand it over to Raj. Thank you again to the esteemed panel, as well as to the finalists. It was a very close judging competition and some wonderful submissions.
Thank you, Vijayanti. And I'm actually eager to see a video, which I think is ready, that I haven't seen yet either, that is going to show us a bit more about who competed for this prize and the exciting innovations that they brought forward. So if we could play the video, please.
Flex ID is a digital identity wallet that allows millions of informal workers and farmers in Africa to receive, store, and share verifiable credentials such as their national IDs or land certificates. It's built atop of interoperable standards from the W3C and the Decentralized Identity Foundation for scalability, interoperability, and open source standards. Susan can use interfaces she's used to, such as WhatsApp, the most popular application in Africa, and USSD code, which you can access offline.
The ID4I solution further championed the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities by providing a grassroots approach that will educate on the benefits of registering for a national identification, coordinate mobile registration within the community of people with intellectual disabilities, thereby creating a database of people with intellectual disabilities and increasing their access to various services. The ID4I initiative is scalable and compatible with ID systems that are currently in place and can be scalable across the 180 countries in which we have a presence.
Inclusive Identity for All solution from MasterCard and Trust Stamp is a privacy-first, cost-effective way to access services at the last mile, both online and offline. We do not store or transfer any sensitive data like photos or templates, and instead create safe biometric tokens.
Use of touchless biometric modalities like palm and fingerprints help us promote safety and privacy and facilitate inclusion for social and practical reasons. We empower individuals to say, I exist, I am here, and I am the same person, so that families can get the services they need, where and when they need them.
Agriculture accounts for 80% of employment in sub-Saharan Africa. However, it only receives 3% of credit from commercial banks. Farmers can access the system through their cooperatives. The cooperatives will perform a one-time validation of a farmer's national ID card and phone number. Once validated, the farmer can access financial services without having to leave their farm. All they need is a simple feature phone. Our solution is simple and reliable. Most importantly, it allows for efficient identification of people in remote areas.
Nancy is a mother, school teacher, and Ebola activist who lives with her family in the hills outside of Freetown, Sierra Leone. For years, she's been unable to open a bank account for one simple reason: she cannot prove who she is. Nancy has been issued identity credentials by her government, but they're not usable in her daily life. And unfortunately, her story is not unique. In developing economies, most official identity systems are not digitally enabled. The burden is placed on poor and vulnerable populations to use paper-based documents that are often lost, damaged, or incomplete, and thus deemed untrustworthy. Kiva Protocol helps close the digital identity gap. Its open source infrastructure uses global standards and enables government agencies to issue verifiable identity credentials to citizen-owned and controlled digital identity wallets.
Our solution is to use a voice-based platform for grievance redressal. The operations are very simple. People just have to call our toll-free numbers, which are accessible via simple phones. Over this call, users can navigate through key presses and record their grievances. These grievances are delegated to a network of trained community volunteers who help resolve the problem. Our solution, therefore, not only helps people to register grievances and get help to solve them, but it also contributes to building greater transparency and strengthens accountability in local communities to improve the delivery of welfare schemes.
I hope that gives you all a flavor of the caliber of finalists and ideas that came forward in the Mission Billion Challenge this year, and also just taking off from our panel of what the actual applications and opportunities are around digital ID, why it's such a transformative development issue, not just a technical one. I understand that the judges had a hard job here, and you're all waiting to hear, what happened. And I am told that the suspense may be killing some of the people who are on this call right now. I am told that actually they have decided there is no first, second, and third prize, that they have 3 first prize winners. So please join me in congratulating these 3 winners who have all found approaches that address inclusion across the full identification lifecycle, and each one is a great solution on its own. Special Olympics Nigeria, ensuring inclusive registration for persons with intellectual disability, which can be scalable for other vulnerable populations. Kiva Protocol, which is building a digital authentication layer on top of foundational ID systems for financial and social services. And Mobile Vani, who's ensuring accountability by making grievance mechanisms more accessible and transparent. Congratulations, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks so much. This is wonderful. Very exciting.
So on behalf of the athletes of Special Olympics Nigeria, that's people with intellectual disabilities, we at Special Olympics want to say a big thank you to the World Bank for supporting the Identification for Inclusion ID4I solution. It's one of the many steps we'll be taking to ensure that
people, all people in Nigeria, especially people with intellectual disabilities, emerge from the shadows and live in a just society. Thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations. Well, congratulations to all of the winners. I know everyone is joining from around the world is feeling very thankful for you and your work. And thanks for sharing it with the world. And congratulations again on this achievement. We are moving to another set of prizes now. And to do that, these are the prizes for the West Africa region. I want to ask Mamta Murthy to join us. She's the Vice President for Human Development.
I'm delighted to join my colleague and my brother Makhtar Diop at this for the second part of this event and to announce the prizes WURI segment, as we call it. Let me just say a few words about why this prize is important. We know that as many as 150 million people could fall into poverty globally because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has shown once again the critical role that social safety nets play in delivering rapid assistance to those people who are affected by a shock. Now, we also know that countries should continue to build strong safety nets and make them more reliable and dynamic and adaptive in order to respond to shocks. And this means building on social registries and foundational unique ID systems. And Raj, you did a very good job earlier in the panel in pointing out what is a foundational unique ID. Now, even though safety nets cover the poor, they do not typically cover the informal sector, particularly those in urban areas. And this informal sector constitutes a large part of the population of the developing world and the population in Africa. Unfortunately, this missing middle is not eligible for safety nets because they're slightly better off than people who are chronically poor. And yet they're not sufficiently well off to be a part of the social insurance programs, which typically cover the formal sector. Now, this informal sector has been very hard hit by the economic effects of COVID-19. And that's why identification is really key, because it allows them to be reached and they can be supported during this difficult time with cash, but also the delivery of other programs. And IDs enable this group to access social benefits, healthcare, education, and other services. This is even more important and urgent now that we have learned the lessons and are learning the lessons of this pandemic. Now, through the WURI program in West Africa, the World Bank is supporting regionally, that means cross-country, interoperable platforms in 6 countries that provide a foundational ID to 100 million people and focused particularly on the poor and vulnerable. And this is important not just for its own sake, but also because of the benefits that it can bring, which I've just talked about. And that's why earlier this year, we launched the Mission Billion Challenge WURI West Africa Prize, sort of the sister prize to the one that Makhtar just talked about. And we put the following question to the very bright minds and innovators in Africa. The question was, how can informal sector workers in West Africa more easily participate in social protection programs using robust foundational ID platforms? When we launched this, to our surprise, 208 teams from 37 countries came forward with their ideas. And I think this is just a testament to the interest and excitement there is around this issue. So let me express my deep gratitude and appreciation to all those who applied to this challenge, but also all those who work behind the scenes to make this challenge a success. You know, sometimes you have to generate demand, and that's what the teams did. And I also want to thank the panel of judges for their time and their guidance in selecting the finalists. So without further ado, Bill, more to you.
The producers have a video they will roll that will show us all the finalists.
Social protection starts with being discoverable, targetable, and having the tools to save, lend, and contribute. Cashbox solves for this by leveraging existing self-help group-based financing models. We do this by providing strong incentives for these self-help groups to digitize their transactions. And the platform for them to leverage financial histories developed.
African tontines have been saving generations of Africans from financial shocks for years. In Cameroon, 1 in 2 informal workers belongs to tontines, yet they don't have access to social protection for income loss. They turn to the tontines to borrow money to pay for unexpected expenses such as healthcare. Now, we want to expand tontines addition to include reliable protection for income loss. From our mobile app, informal workers from Trusted Tontine can contribute to a saving register account to which donors from organizations can match the contribution.
En Afrique de l'Ouest, plus de 1 500 000 conducteurs de taxi moto. La tontine, qui généralement est un filet social, n'est pas une pratique aisée pour eux, car ils sont éloignés les uns des autres. Tonti Plus combine l'usage du mobile money, une identification par les opérateurs GSM, une application sur le téléphone pour permettre à un conducteur de taxi moto de pouvoir transférer son épargne quotidienne vers son groupe de tontine et recevoir en retour son tour de ramassage dans son portefeuille mobile money. L'objectif est de se baser sur la régularité des cotisations tontinières des conducteurs de taxi moto pour leur fournir des prestations sociales qui les éloignent de la précarité.
She's torn between sending her daily sales to the bank, which is kilometers away, give it to a savings collector, or take it home. 80% of the African population, including my mother, are in the informal sector. Nasika is a digital microbank with benefits which include no maintenance fee, no minimum balance, no deposit required, and no hidden fees, using cash or mobile money to aid in financial inclusion for the marginalized. One can simply save any amount, anytime, any day, anywhere at their own convenience or with our mobile bankers.
C'est une solution souple et flexible qui permet de faire des petites cotisations quotidiennes adaptées aux revenus des travailleurs du secteur informel pour souscrire à un pacte de protection sociale avec un numéro d'identification unique.
We have been running social protection programs like Bao Pension in Kenya for the last 10 years. We see similar context across Africa, and we would like to carry the learnings to West Africa. Our proposed solution to be developed for the West Africa will work on basic phones and stand on 3 pillars: payments, products, and ID framework. Support product marketplace and benefit portability, real-time balances and one-click flexi payments, encourage saving, work with social registries to disburse relief like for COVID.
Ghana has 13 million informal workers. West Africa has an estimated 400 million. Our solution allows anyone to create a pension account with us and then save any amount, no matter how small, at any time of their convenience. Innovation through behavioral science, human-centered design, data analytics, and artificial intelligence will help PPT develop innovative financial products and replicate this model beyond Ghana.
An inspiring group, just like we saw for the global one. So maybe, Mamta, I can pass it back to you to make the big announcement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Raj. It was a very difficult decision. Honorary mention, so not a prize, an honorary mention goes to the Universal Social Protection Wallet and Na-Ya. So congratulations on your honorary mention. The second prize goes to Tonti Plus from Benin. Congratulations. And the first prize goes to Nasika from Ghana. A huge congratulations to you.
Wow, congratulations, everyone. Really exciting.
We made it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are grateful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Really, thank you for all the wonderful submissions and also, of course, congratulations to the winners. I believe the design features and ideas that you have developed can prototype more locally tailored open solutions that will really provide a benefit to informal workers in terms of accessing social insurance. So congratulations, and back to you, Raj.
Well, I have to say, in a era when the news is often bad, and especially during a pandemic, this is a pretty inspirational event. to be a part of, to hear how all of you are out there innovating, creating new solutions, looking for the opportunity in the digital transformation in the world today, and ensuring that nobody is left behind. So really thank you for being a part of this, for submitting your ideas. Thank you to everyone who's joined and for the good work of ID4D at the World Bank. It's been an honor to get to facilitate the session today on such an important topic. Enjoy the rest of the annual meetings and be well.